Good afternoon, church. It's a blessing to be able to connect with you this Wednesday and to see the things the Lord is teaching us as we study through these key messages, key topics in the Old Testament. And we're actually looking now at the prophets, and we're in the book of Daniel. And this is our last part of Daniel part 4. And today's message or today's focus is the vision of the man clothed in linen. And actually, it's we would call it a theophany or a Christophany, an appearance of Jesus, in a sense, before his incarnation, coming to interact with none other than Daniel. And we'll see a little bit about that today as we look at chapters 10, 11, and 12 to finish the book of Daniel. So let's begin, let's pray, and let's ask the Lord to lead us today. Lord, we just look at your word and we want to see you more clearly. And Lord, it's amazing to see how detailed in many places you did exactly what you said you were going to do. And the prophecy was done so specifically and to show your hand in the kingdoms, and especially to Daniel, this man that was a man of integrity, a man that you loved and showed what was going to happen in his kingdom after him, especially with his people. And I just ask, Lord, now as we see this, we would see your hand, and we also get to know you and how you work and how you have everything in control in your hands. And as you're leading your plan, your purposes on this earth, Lord. And I ask for just greater vision of you, Lord, today. I ask this in your name. Amen. So we're in Daniel chapter 10, and we see here the last of the visions. And this vision actually goes from chapter 10, 11, and 12. So Daniel chapter 10, this is in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia. A message was revealed to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. So we see he had visions during Darius, and then also now in Cyrus. I remember Darius and Cyrus were kind of the Medes and the Persians. Darius the Mede, Cyrus the Persian, working together to defeat the Babylonian Empire. So we have Darius coming out, Daniel on the lion's den, but also Cyrus is the one that sends them back and sends them back to the Jerusalem and to rebuild the decree that he puts for them to go back and rebuild Jerusalem. So we see these two kings working together, and then they kind of merge, and we see the kings of Persia, instead of Medo-Persian Empire, it becomes a Persian Empire, is this unity. And we see actually Cyrus taking the lead, but later on we'll see the ones that come on. We have a Darius in there, and we have others that are the leaders of this kingdom. So this is the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia. And it says here, a message was revealed to Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. This is after the previous visions and dreams he had. This is also, in a sense, after Daniel chapter 6, Darius. And so this is, in a sense, the last part of Daniel's life, the end, the closing of Daniel's life. And it says the message was true. The message was true. And in a sense, Daniel's saying that after all that Daniel had seen and how the Lord's hand and how he had worked and established the kingdoms, he'd actually seen the transition from the kingdom of Babylon to the kingdom of the Medo-Persians, as was prophesied in the dream before the Medo-Persians had come when he was with Nebuchadnezzar, and seeing the dream of the statue with the head of gold and then the chest of, in a sense, silver representing Persia and the Medo-Persians. And so he knew that this part of the dream is true, so he knows the rest that's coming on is also true. But he says, as he looks at it, the appointed time, this is something for the future. The appointed time is long. He saw some things that happened right away and the fulfillment, but some of these things, he said, are fulfillment for the future and far away. Just like we saw last week in the 70 weeks, we saw there were some things that were going to happen right after this. Actually for Daniel, right? Not that close to him, but close enough. And then, but there were things that were going to happen in the future. And for us, there's things that still have not been fulfilled that are, we see a future fulfillment as the Lord brings a closing to the events of history, because the history, once again, is his story, the story of the Lord and his plans. So the third year, the message was true. The appointed time was long. He understood the message and had an understanding of the vision. So he understood, in a sense, mostly what it meant, but not everything, but a lot of what it meant he understood, and the vision. So those days he was in mourning for 3 full weeks, and he was, all the visions that he had and the future for Jerusalem and the things he'd seen in the vision of the 70 weeks that are coming for his people, and the desolation, and talked about the abomination. So there's just all these things that he'd seen, and his spirit was still not at peace. So he was going before the Lord and says, what's going to happen? And so, he ate, it says, ate no pleasant food, no meat or wine came to his mouth. He didn't anoint himself till the 3 weeks were fulfilled. And this looks like a time he was just fasting and praying to the Lord. We saw in the previous vision last week that he had been praying for his people, that the Lord would remember his promise to return him in 70 years when he saw the 70 years were over. And so he'd been praying for his people. And now, as the vision he got about his people and what was going to happen, he was still praying. So, and as he prays, and the 24th day of the first month, he was by the side of the great river that is Tigris. He lifted up his eyes, and a certain man clothed in linen, whose waist was girded with the gold of Epiphanes. And his body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like the torches of fire, his arms and feet like burnished bronze in color. The sound of his word like it was the voice of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great terror fell upon them, so that they fled and hid themselves. Therefore I was left alone, and I saw this great vision, and no strength remained in me, for my vigor was turned to frailty in me, and I retained no strength. He had a vision like we see, in a sense, in other places in the Bible. We see this in Isaiah, and we talked about Isaiah 6, when Isaiah sees the Lord high and lifted up, and in his holy temple, and in a sense, as he saw the cherubims and talking about holy, holy, holy is the Lord, he says, I fell at his feet like a dead man. And so, and then the angel, of course, takes the burning coal and takes it to his lips and gives him strength to stand again and to hear the voice of the Lord. And of course, we see the famous, the Lord saying, who will I send? And Isaiah said, here I am, send me. And so that vision, we see very similar. He sees a vision, although Isaiah doesn't see a man there. He says he saw God high and lifted up, and the glory and his countenance and just his presence filled everything. The vision we see here in Daniel is in the same idea and format, but we see it a little more like another vision we see, not at this time, but at the end of the Bible, in the book of Revelation chapter 1, we have John. And John, in Revelation chapter 1, verse 10, he says, I was in the spirit on the Lord's day. I heard behind me a loud voice as of a trumpet saying, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. And what you see, write in a book and send it to the 7 churches where in Asia and Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. So he turns, and this is what he sees. He saw 7 golden lampstands. In the midst of them, 7 golden lampstands, one like the Son of Man. So here's the description. Clothed in a garment down to his feet and girded about his chest with a gold band. Okay, so gold band. And we see here this was appearance of lightning. And he had around, he was girded with the gold of Epiphanes. So, okay, gold band, check. His head and his hair were like white wool, white as snow. His eyes were the flame of fire. His feet were like fine brass, as refined in the furnace. His voice were the sound of many waters. So we see here his body was like beryl, his appearance like lightning, his eyes like torches of fire, his arms and feet like burnished bronze in color, and the sound of his words like the voice of a multitude. Looks like this, in a sense, that trying to describe the things. His right hand was 7 stars, and his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was like the sun shining in its strength. And once again, we see the reaction to this. When I saw him, I fell at his feet like a dead man. And he laid his hand on me and said, don't be afraid. I am the first and the last. I'm he who lives and was dead. And behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. And I have the keys of Hades and death. And we see where John recognizes him. In a sense, he recognizes who it is, even though here we see Jesus in glory. in his glorified body in glory, Jesus appearing to him, but he knew it was Jesus. And so the Son of Man, he was Jesus. And so he sees in the description, just like the one we have here in the book of Daniel. And it's this type of description. It's very poetic. And it says his body was like, his face was like, his eyes were like. And there's something that we should realize that when Daniel is describing him, when John is describing him, they're trying to use words, and there's not words, and it's like his body was tanned. No, it was more than it was almost like, and it's a very poetic metaphor. It's something like something. So it gives you an idea, and it's something to connect it with that tries to describe the feeling or the sense of it that is not quite there, but there's no words that you can use that work. So you, in a poetic way, you describe it was somehow like this, but it means it was like it. It wasn't exactly like it, but it was the closest thing to use could describe it was this. So his body was like beryl. So when I looked at him, it's like this precious stone, the color, maybe, the shining, but it was like the closest thing I can use to just his body was like beryl. His face like lightning. I looked at his face and it was like there's lightning coming, but it looked at the thing, the closest description you could have was like lightning. His eyes like torches of fire, and you just see his eyes, and so all of this are just descriptive words that Daniel uses and then John uses to describe the vision of Jesus in glory, and try to explain and to share with them what this is like. But we see that there's a similarity when he sees this, the power of it causes them to fall on their feet like dead men. Daniel says, a great terror fell upon me, no strength within me. I just my vigor was turned to frailty. I retained no strength. He just collapsed to the ground. People who could not see it just felt the presence and ran in terror. John says he felt at his feet like a dead man until the words were on him. And then we see back in Daniel chapter 10, verse 9, I heard the sound of his words. And while I heard the sound of his words, I was in a deep sleep on my face, with my face to the ground. Once he fell like to his feet, like a dead man. And just like we see in Revelation, it said, suddenly in verse 10, a hand touched me, which made me tremble on my knees and the palms of my hands. And so as this touches him, it revitalizes him. And just like we see in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1, in the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne high and lifted up. The train of his robe filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphim. Each one had 6 wings, and with 2 he covered his face, and 2 covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one cried to the other, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the doors were shaken by the voice of him, and cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. I said, woe is me, I'm undone, for I'm a man of unclean lips, and dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. So he fell also with his strength gone. But the seraphim flew to him, having a live coal which was taken in the tongues. And he touched my mouth and said, behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away. Your sin is purged. And we see this, he's strengthened again. And there's a whole idea when we stand in the presence of a holy God, we see that there's nothing in us that we can bring to this. And it's only through his strength, through the purging of his sin, we see Isaiah. And through him recognizing that he's a man of unclean lips in the midst of a people of unclean lips, that he himself is a man of unclean lips. In his own recognition, he sees himself. And it's interesting in the book of Isaiah, in the first few chapters, and I think we talked about this when we looked at Isaiah, he's kind of very much the people, talking about the people and the judgment of God. But when he sees God himself, he says, me, I am a man of unclean lips, and I live in the midst of a people of unclean lips. So it's that boson when we see God, that we truly see ourselves. And that's why we see Daniel and John and Isaiah both falling at his feet, no strength left. There's no strength in them before God until God touches them, and then they're able to get up. So back to Daniel chapter 10, verse 11, this man in linen says to him, Daniel, man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak to you. Stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. And while he was speaking his word to me, I stood trembling. So his strength returns when he tells him to stand, when he gives him that strength, that strength. So Daniel rises up and is able to listen. So he said to me, do not fear, Daniel, for the first day you set your heart to understand and humble yourself before your God. Your words were heard, and I come here because of your words. So don't be afraid. When you decided to set your heart to understand and humble yourself before God, your words were heard. So we see he'd been fasting and praying for 3 weeks. And so your words were heard when you started. But the kingdom of Persia, the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me for 21 days. And behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the king of Persia. And I've come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter day, for the vision refers to many days yet to come. So we see here spiritual warfare, and of course, if this is an appearance of Jesus, we see what the difference between Jesus here and the angels. We see he has a vision of the angels before, but there's not the same response, neither with John or with Daniel when they see an angel, Gabriel, for example, and tells them that there's not that same lack of strength as they're in the presence of Jesus. But we also see that there's opposition, and we see the kingdom of Persia, the prince of the kingdom of Persia. We see these are the rulers and the principalities and the powers behind the kingdoms. And as we look at this, we realize behind the kingdoms, behind these, we have rulers and principalities and powers. And Satan himself, is behind it, bringing and withstanding and bringing the spiritual warfare. So we see this warfare in heaven that's happening. And so he said that I was bringing this message, but there was this spiritual warfare going on. They didn't want you to hear and understand. And so Michael came and assisted me. And I want to give you this vision. What is going to happen in the latter days to come. And this vision is about many days yet to come. And of course, we might ask the question, well, he was opposing the kingdom of Persia, but he's Jesus, he's God. So for some reason, we don't understand it. There was that opposition, and maybe that he was not able to come, but he had to deal with the opposition. We don't know exactly what is going on, but we see one thing: spiritual warfare happens, and we see Daniel prays, and the message comes to him. But there's that warfare, that prevention of coming, in the sense that slowing down of him coming. And we see we can look to other places in the Bible talking about spiritual warfare to see that is going on. There's the host in heaven, in a sense, this war that is going on with principalities and powers. And we also see the angels, Michael, one of the chief princes. I mean, Michael is the one that many times is looked as we'll see later on. Gabriel is a messenger. We see Michael being the prince, in a sense, associated with the Jewish people, and coming to assistance and helping there. But we do see the difference, in a sense, when he has a vision of an angel, it's very different than when he has a vision of this man clothed in linen, this man with an appearance with a gold belt. And so there's a difference in the reaction and of Daniel, of John, and of Isaiah when this happens. So he wants to tell him the things to come. And so when he said these words to him, I turned my face to the ground and became speechless. Okay, here, the words of him coming are like that in Revelation. We see that two-edged sword. His words are so powerful and moving, and it's almost like the sword piercing through him, in a sense. And so the man, once again, having the likeness of the son of men, touched my lips, just like Isaiah. And I opened my mouth and spoke, saying to him who stood above me, my Lord, because of the vision of my sorrows have overwhelmed me. I have retained no strength because of the visions. Which ones? The prior visions. I've been overwhelmed by them, and I have no strength. For how can this servant of my Lord talk with you, my Lord? As for me, no strength remains in me now, nor is there any breath left in me. And so we see, this is too much. Daniel says, this is too much for me. And as we look and we think of the things, as we look at, Daniel had a vision of the future, what was going to happen to his people, and a very clear vision, and things, good things, but also, bad things, and they were going to come, but also ultimately was going to be the triumph of the kingdom of the Lord. But difficult things as he saw them, and he was left without strength. And it makes me think, nowadays, with all the things that we're seeing going on, we don't have the vision of everything happening, but it just many times we can be like Daniel because of the situations that we are maybe in our own flesh we can't handle. We have no strength, but we see that God, touches him and strengthens him. And in him, we have our strength. And that, once again, that vertical relationship we have with him, we're able to connect and receive the strength that we need to continue on. And if we try to do it in our own power and resources, that's the time that many times we are like Daniel, at that time he was without strength, couldn't do anything. But we see this, the man touches him and strengthens him. And he says, "Oh, greatly beloved, fear not. Peace be to you, and be strong. Yes, be strong." So when he spoke, I was strengthened, and said, "Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me." So we received strength from Jesus, from this vision. And he says, "Okay, do you know why I've come to you? And now I must return to fight with the king of Persia. And when I have gone forth, indeed the prince of Greece will come." So the prince of Persia, the one behind Persia, and then also the one behind Greece, these heavenly hosts, they're fighting against. But I'm going to tell you what's going to happen before I go back to the battle, and the spiritual battle that's happening. I'll tell you what is noted in the scriptures of truth. This is what the scripture, this is the truth. "No one upholds me against these except Michael, your prince." So we see this battle that is happening. Here we go. He's going to give him the vision. And we go to Daniel chapter 11, and we might think, oh, new vision, new king. No, well, he says, if we continue the train of thought, I'm going to go back to battle. No one is upholding me except Michael, your prince. And also, in the first year of Darius the Mede, the last vision you had, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. So I gave Michael strength when he was battling, in a sense, in the spiritual warfare that was going on. So, and now he begins the vision. So this Darius the Mede, the first year of Darius the Mede, is not, in a sense, a new vision. It's not something that is happening, that is adding. This is something that we've seen that was already being talked about and dealt with. So, in the vision in chapter 9 was the first year of Darius, son of Ahasuerus, of the line of the Medes, and this was what was known to him. So, in that year, that's when he had that vision. And of course, in the visions that came before was when he was Belshazzar was king. So we see in that first year, I stood up to strengthen him, and now I will tell you the truth. And here it goes. "Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th will be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece." So where are we now? Well, this is talking about in this vision, as we go to the beginning of chapter 10, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Okay, so we go back here to the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, and then we look at our timeline. And so let's look at this right here. We'll go back to this kings and prophets timeline here. And we are in Daniel. So let's get this, make this bigger. And we're in Daniel. And then we have Cyrus. And that's where we are, 3rd year of King Cyrus. And after this, it said, "There shall arise," it says, 3 kings. So, okay, so we have Cambyses, we have Smerdis, and then Darius. And this is Darius the Great. So it says, arise. 3 kings after them in Persia. And the fourth, Xerxes or Ahasuerus, and this is the one that Esther marries to be and becomes queen. Ahasuerus will be the fourth king, and it says, he shall stir up against the realm of Greece. And interesting, Ahasuerus in the year 480, 2 years after Esther becomes queen, he has a massive invasion of Greece. Stories of history, movies have been made about this. Ahasuerus invades Greece and is defeated, in a sense, stopped. But because of the destruction and what he does and all that, he stirs up. We see, in a sense, he'll stir up all against the realm of Greece, and he stirs up Greece. And because of this invasion and what he does, and in a sense, the future attacks on Greece, Greece begins to get unified. And of course, we see a mighty king will arise. And this mighty king arises, and this is actually Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great actually doesn't come until later. And we have here these kings. They actually, it says, if I look in my notes here, Xerxes was defeated in a sense in the famous battle in 480 BC when he went against the Greeks, the Battle of Thermopylae, and this stirred the Greeks up and led his defeat in the naval battle of Salamis. So this is year 480, and Alexander rises to power in the year 335 BC, and he dies in the year 323 BC at the age of 33. But we see here when it talks about Alexander, let's go back here to our screen. When it talks about Alexander, it says, a mighty king will arise who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. That's Alexander the Great. And when he is arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided into the 4 winds of heaven. So we see he rises up, he conquers, and he conquers the Persians and conquers the world, in a sense, the known world. And he actually, the famous saying is Alexander cried because there was no more worlds to conquer. But he conquers, gets all the way to India, and he dies. And when he dies, his 4 generals divide up the kingdom. So he dies in the year 323 at the age of 33. And in his 4 generals, we had Cassander, goes over Macedonia, part of Greece. We have Lysimachus, and he goes with Thrace and Asia Minor, which is basically the part of what is Turkey now. Ptolemy the first goes over Egypt, and he's one that stays in our focus. And then Seleucus the first goes over Syria and the Near East. So we have 4 kings, but 2 of them not really of importance. They're up in Greece and they're up in Asia Minor. But the king of the north and south are the ones that are concern us, and we see here in the prophecy. So the Ptolemaic south, Egypt, is one of them, and then the Seleucid and Syria is the other. And guess what's between Egypt and Syria? The promised land. So we see the kings of the north and south battling it out in subsequent years over in the battleground, which ends up being the promised land. So the king, we see these kings will rise up. His power shall be broken up, divided to the 4 winds. It says, but not among his posterity. Don't be his kids. But according to his dominion, which he ruled, his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others beside these. So it won't be his inheritance. It'll be his generals. And so we see here now from verse 5 all the way to the end of the chapter, kings of the north and south, which were focused on the Ptolemies in the south and the Seleucids in the north. So the king of the south will become strong. And we see that Ptolemy the first coming and becoming strong, and the trouble beginning between them. So the king is there, Ptolemy, coming up being strong and gaining power in a sense greater than the other generals, and was trying to, in a sense, once these generals each get their own territory, of course, what they try to do is expand their territory to kind of eat up the other ones. So he extends his territory, of course, north to Syria, the king of the north, and he shall have a great dominion. And at the end of some years, they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of her authority. Neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought to her, and with him who begot her, and him who strengthened her. And when we look at this, we see all these things. They're so detailed. This daughter shall go up, and it's not going to have this. Branches of a roof shall arise in place. Verse 7, an army will enter the fortress of the king of the north, to deal and prevail, shall carry their gods captives to Egypt. That's the kings of the south with their princes. And we see all these things going up. And as we read through this, you see all these battles going back and forth and back and forth. And basically, chapter 8, 9, 10, 11, verse all the way down to verse 20, we see these battles going back and forth. The interesting part, if we go and actually I've printed it out here and look at the history of this, we can actually read the passage and look at history and go, oh, okay, so the first one is Ptolemy the first, and he gains greater power than Seleucus the first and expands his kingdom. And then Ptolemy's daughter, who is it? Oh, Berenice. And so we see that Ptolemy II of the south and Antiochus Epiphanes of the north agreed to have peace on two conditions. So what are the conditions of peace? Antiochus will divorce his wife, Laodice, and marry Ptolemy's daughter. So she will go up, and any child that Bernice has will be the heir. So that's a way to kind of expand your kingdom through marriage. And so they decided to do this. The marriage took place, but what happens? Ptolemy died, and Antiochus goes back to his first wife and gets rid of Bernice. So the first wife, Laodicea, wanted to secure her position by poisoning her husband and by having Bernice and her attendants and her infant son killed. And so she kills off Bernice and installs her own son, Seleucus II, in Antiochus' place. So because of this, Bernice's angry brothers rise up, and Ptolemy III took Ptolemy II's place and goes up and kills Laodice in the port city of Antioch and carries back a amount of booty back to Egypt. And this endured for the time of Seleucus II. So you're reading this like, oh, so this is almost like reading a history book. This is a prophecy. This happened before. And this is one of the reasons that Daniel, many times people say, no, it couldn't have been, because they don't realize that God is telling him what's going to happen so detailed. But one of the reasons they go is because this is so detailed. You can read history and look at the names and look at what happened, and it says, oh, okay, this is what's going to happen. And even though it's prophetic, this is what, but you can look at this, it's like it lines up exactly with the kings of the north and the south, and the kings of the north and the south, and the kings of the north and the south, and coming up and fighting each other. And so as you go through this and looking at it, it is almost like reading a history book. For example, verse 11, the king of the south shall be moved with rage and go out and fight with him. The king of the north, who shall muster a great army, and the multitude shall be given to the hand of the enemy. We see the battle of Raphia, a new king of the south, Ptolemy the fourth, who was the son of Ptolemy the III, was moved with rage because it was against him and that the campaign of the two sons of Seleucus had been waged. So he was, so he goes out and finds the king of the north, Antiochus III the Great. And according to the historian Polybus, the battle of Raphia in 219, Antiochus met Ptolemy with 62,000 infantrymen, 6,000 cavalrymen, and 102 elephants. But Ptolemy brought with him 70,000 infantrymen, 5,000 cavalrymen, and 73 elephants. Okay, lots of elephants on those sides. Now, Antiochus, the multitudes of Antiochus were given into the hands of Ptolemy, and Ptolemy killed 10,000 of Antiochus' infantrymen and 200 of his cavalrymen, and so on. And so in the end, in spite of the victory of Raphia, he did not prevail. So he didn't solidify his gains in the north. So we see these things going on and happening. We see the king of the north having his revenge in verse 13, will return and muster a greater army than the former, and will come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. And we see that. That's what happened. Antiochus, because he lost things, because Ptolemy did not consolidate his gains and went back to his life of luxury, raises up another army and makes an alliance with the king of Macedonia and comes back against him, and rises against the south. And so we see these things, happening, the revenge coming back. Then we look at this coming, battles going back and forth and back and forth. And so we see these kings, we read these names. We even have a Cleopatra, not the famous one, but the Cleopatra the First was from the South Kingdom. We see her, he's trying to have her to marry off into this, to kind of stop this this fighting between them. And she's the daughter of women in verse 17. He shall give him a daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him nor be for him. So we see that doesn't bring peace between these two kingdoms. And so then we look at also at the end of this, we see in turning this Antiochus III, the Great, now takes himself to the coastlands, and he begins, to have many battles and take many. But the ruler says, "I shall bring reproach against them to an end, and with the reproach removed, he shall turn back to him." But I know that we see at this time also Rome is growing, and the power of Rome is growing. And so it stopped Antiochus in his plans, and it turns this reproach against him. So he comes back, he defeats him in Lydia and Asia Minor, forces him to make peace, and comes back and dies a year later. So we see these battles going back and forth in these times, and it's all like if you're reading a history book. Then we get to verse 21, and we come back to one of these kings that we've talked about before, and this Antiochus Epiphanes. And Antiochus Epiphanes is this one who's going to, in a sense, desecrate the temple and lead to the Maccabean revolt. So it says, verse 21, his place shall rise a vile person to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. And so we see he comes in, seizes the kingdom, and begins to work against the different, the southern kingdom, northern kingdom. He's from the north, of course, and says that the king of the south will be stirred against him. And we see all these things happening. But when he, in a sense, wins, and he comes back, verse 28, he comes back to the land with great riches. His heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, and he shall do damage and return to his own land. So we see in all these battles back and forth, Antiochus Epiphanes comes against, in a sense, the holy covenant, the land of Israel, the promised land. And we see here as he comes and interact, we see him interacting specifically with the land of Israel. So verse 21, in the appointed time he shall return and go south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter in his battle. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. And his forces shall be mustered, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. They shall take away the daily sacrifices and place the abomination of desolation. So he goes south. He was not prosper. He doesn't win his battle against the kings of the south, comes back, and in his rage, he vents his rage out on the holy covenant, the Jerusalem and the temple. And it says he stops the daily sacrifices and places the abomination of desolation. That's when he stops the sacrifice of the temple and puts in a statue of Zeus and begins to, in a sense, sacrifice to pigs, and we see this leads against to the Maccabean revolts. We see verse 32, those who do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt with flattery, but the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. And we see that happening here, the people who know him, the people who follow. And if we look at the book of the Maccabees, first Maccabees 154 records that in the 15th day of the month, Chislev, in the year 145, the king erected a horrible abomination upon the altar of Holocaust. And in the surrounding cities of Judah, they built pagan altars. And this describes a horrible time when the desecration of the Jewish religion reached the climax as an altar or an idol statue devoted to Olympian Zeus or Jupiter was erected in the temple, which is the Abomination of Desolation. So on Chislev 25, sacrifices, probably swine. First Maccabees 147 records that Antiochus sent out orders to the Jews to build pagan altars and temples and shrines and to sacrifice swine and unclean animals on them. And Second Maccabees 6, 4, and 5 records that the Gentiles brought into the temple things that were forbidden, so that the altar was covered with abominable offerings prohibited by the laws. In Daniel 11, we see the prophecies as the events recorded these prophecies. So these events, they knew the truth, could recognize what was taking place. God had prophesied it, and just as in history God had written, so he set up the abomination of desolation. And it says, see in verse 31, that forces will arise, desecrate and pollute, profane the sanctuary, and do away with regular sacrifice and set up the abomination of desolation. So we see that happening. We see the Maccabean revolt starting in 166 BC, and them having the victory over Antiochus. And then on the 25th of December, 165, the next year, we see them cleansing the temple, recovering the temple and cleansing the temple. And we see there that the Jews now celebrate as Hanukkah, the festival of lights. They were cleansing the temple, and they only had enough oil for the candles for one day, but supposedly the oil lasted the 8 days it needed for the purification, and they were able to cleanse the temple. So we see that with what we celebrate, or what the Jews celebrate in December time, because the calendar varies, but the Hanukkah festival of lights that happens. So we see that going on there in the connection with Antiochus Epiphanes. And it says, verse 33, those of the people who understand shall instruct many, for the many days they shall fall by the sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. And so the same Jews could read this from Daniel and know this is what's happening, and receive that instruction. And when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue. And some of those understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is for the appointed time. So here to verse 35, this is the battle is going on. Some will be clothed in white, you say martyrs in a sense for that, and they will understand what is happening with Antiochus. We see that during the Maccabees are able to get rid of the Seleucids, but and they actually have their own kingdom for a little bit. But then we see Rome coming in. Rome was already rising up. Rome coming in, and the Roman Empire bringing us in there to the time of Jesus, when the Rome takes over Judea, and also in a sense these Seleucid and Ptolemaic empires also fall to the Romans as Rome grows in power and strength. But we still have some verses left. So from verse 36 on, we see that, as we looked at in chapter 8, that Antiochus Epiphanes is also a symbol of the future Antichrist. And he's, in a sense, a shadow of what's going to happen in the future. So we see the beginning of talking about what actually happened with Antiochus Epiphanes and what he did, but also it goes into the future and shows a future desecration of the temple, a future time when, just like the events that happened in a time of after Daniel, in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, we'll see in the future this will happen, and there will be something in the light of, in the nature of, in a sense, this is the fulfillment of what we see in Antiochus Epiphanes. And this brings us in this last part. So then the king shall do according to his own will. This is the future. This is the Antichrist. He'll exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what he has been determined shall be done. He shall neither regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above all. This is the Antichrist. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, a God that his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus shall he act against the strong fortress with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance in glory. He shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. At this time, at the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him. It's like, wait, isn't he the king of the north? Remember, this is future. So we have the kings of the south and north coming, and he's there in the glorious land, and they will attack him. We see the battles that are going against the Antichrist as he gets, in a sense, his power. Coming in like a whirlwind, their chariots and horsemen with many ships, and they shall enter the countries and overwhelm them and pass through. He shall enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Shall be his power over the treasures of gold and silver, of all precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow at his heel. But news from the east and north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. He shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. He shall come to his end, and no one will help him. So we see this is the Antichrist setting up his power and fighting against those who are against him and having, in a sense, his power. And in the end, he said, he shall come to his end and no one will help him. But you see, he establishes his kingdom and, in a sense, his tents in the place between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, in a sense, between Jerusalem. So we see that place there. And so we switch chapters to the end of time. So we're seeing now this is the future. This is the Antichrist. This is connected to Revelation, and the Antichrist there in the time of tribulation is at that time Michael shall stand up, the prince of the people of Israel, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, the angel. And there shall be a time of trouble, which was never seen since there was a nation. Even so, to that time, and the time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found is written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like stars forever and ever. So in the end, we see, and we look at Revelation, talk about the woman and the hiding, and we look at Satan going against Israel and the woman who birthed and sets the child, which is Jesus. And so we see all this happening and the people being persecuted, time of great trouble, but they will be delivered. So at the end, we see the Lamb's book of life. Everyone who is found and written in the book shall be delivered. Those who were dead shall awaken. We see that the judgment seats, some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt, some for life eternal with the Lord, others for separation, and says the lake of fire, shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So this is what is looking towards Revelation. And he ends the prophecy, and now he speaks to Daniel. He says, but you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. So Daniel, you understood this, you saw this, but just seal the prophecy. Many things are going to happen. There's going to be people running to and fro. And Daniel looked and saw two others on this riverbank, on the other side of the riverbank, and one of the men clothed in linen, who was above the water of the river. How long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? And I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, when he held his right hand up and left hand to heaven, swore by him who lives forever, that it should be for a time, times, and half a time. And then we see that as the time of the tribulation. This time of the tribulation, when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all things shall be finished. So we see when this tribulation comes, this great tribulation against the Jewish people. And once again, the abomination of desolation, when this happens, it shall be finished. And Daniel listening to this, okay, I don't understand all this. What are the times and half a time and when shall be the end of this? And so he said, Daniel, go your way. These words are closed. They're sealed to the end of time. Many shall be purified, made white, refined but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. The wise, those who read scripture and understand. And it gives some numbers from the time the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up. There shall be 1,290 days, and blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,300 35 days. But you go your way till the end, for you shall rest and will arise to your inheritance at the end of days. So we see in the time of tribulation, we have divided to two periods, to 3.5 years and 3.5 years. And these 3.5 years and 3.5 years are divided into, at the middle, the sacrifices stop. The temple is rebuilt. So we have the temple done, but in the middle, the sacrifices are stopped at the 3.5 years, and the abomination of desolation comes. And then the people, the Jewish people, are persecuted for those last 3.5 years at times and half a time. And we see they're persecuted. And it said, blessed is the man who will wait until 1,335 days. So one who goes, we had from the time that the abomination of desolation set up to the end is 1,290 days. And blessed is the one who waits to 1,335 days. There's a few more days. It makes it through all the way to the end. So we see that last part, the great tribulation, not the last 3.5 years of the great tribulation. But I said, Daniel, you don't need to worry about this. You go your way to the end, rest, arise to your inheritance at the end of days. Now, in the quick, going through Daniel in 4 weeks that we did, we can't go into all the details and the numbers. And actually, it'd be Daniel's a book that you can study and look at, and in a sense, also look at in conjunction with Revelation. And one of these days, we'll get to Revelation. Right now, we're still in Daniel. But as we look at these things, what we learn is that the Lord is in control, and he always has been. And he gives Daniel specific, this is exactly how it's going to happen. It's almost like we said, it's like a history book. I can pick up a history book and look and see Daniel chapter 11, and it kind of lines up exactly. And the Lord fulfilled prophecy. So we can look back and say, look, there's fulfilled prophecy that he did it to the letter. And so we look to the future and we say, okay, we don't understand when this is going to happen or how this is going to happen. We know what has happened already and how the Lord did it. So we can look to the future and know the Lord is the same. He's not changing. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So he's going to do what he did in the past. In the future, he's going to meet and do exactly what he said he's going to do. And right now we read some things and we're like, I don't understand. What is it? How many days in this days? And we don't quite understand it. But we know in the end, once it happened, we will go, oh, that's what it meant. That's what it was. And oh, look, exactly just what he said he was going to do. He did. So we know the Lord's going to fulfill. And so it says here something, as we look at this, verse 10, in the last chapter 12 says, many shall be purified, made white and refined. We see martyred, many will die in the martyrdom. And it says the wicked will do wickedly. And the wicked will not understand. They won't see God's hand in all this, but the wise shall understand. And that's where I want to, as we look at this, those who are wise, those who seek to know what the word says and get to know God's word and get to know him, like Daniel. Why did Daniel get all this revealed? How did he understand all this? He was fasting and praying. And Lord, forgive my people. He was interceding for his people. He was praying for them. Then he was praying, Lord, what's going to happen? Well, Lord, what do you want me to do? I'm here. I'm available. I want to serve you. He was there, that man of prayer. And we see as he did that, the Lord revealed and showed and showed himself to them. And so we can learn from Daniel as we see a man of integrity, a man who, as we looked at week 1, purpose in his heart not to defile himself. And he completed that purpose. And then we saw in week 2, and that as we looked at Daniel, he was a man of integrity. They could not find anything in his life to hold against him except in his honor of the Lord. So we see that also happening, and Daniel honoring him in that. And then in this last week, we saw how God reveals in these dreams the things that are going to happen. But we see Daniel interceding for his people, praying for them. And Lord, 70 years have passed, Lord, fulfill and asking forgiveness for them, including himself, even though he was a man of integrity, asking forgiveness for them and including himself in that. Because as we saw in this last one, as he has his vision, he realized that in himself, he has nothing. Just like John and Isaiah, when they came and had the vision of God, they realized they were a man of unclean lips in the middle of people with unclean lips, and that only for the power of Jesus and God in them would they be able to to do anything. So we see these 4 weeks as we looked at Daniel, we've learned, we need to come before him and let him fill us, empty ourselves of who we are, and fill us and his power, his strength. And then as we seek him in prayer and integrity and in purposing in our hearts not to defile ourselves with the things of this world, and seeking him in prayer, we see the Lord will show and reveal and lead and guide us. And like Daniel, we can be wise and understand and see that the times that we're living in, as we look at them, not through the temporary things, not through the worldly eyes, but we look at them through spiritual eyes, looking at life differently. And it just, as we look at all these things and think about it, it just reminds me of how the Lord calls us to do, is to, 2 Corinthians 4:18, we do not look at things which are seen, for the things which are seen, the things which are not seen. The things which are seen are temporary. We don't look at the things that are temporary, things are as the world sees, but we look at the things which are eternal. And as we do that, we see that we had that wisdom of the Lord, because we look at the things through the light of eternity. And in that perspective, we can see, like Daniel, know the Lord is in charge and working and going to fulfill every step of the way his plan. And we want to be part of that plan as we put ourselves in his hands. And like Isaiah, when he had the vision of God and he was cleansed, and God said, who will I send? And we say, here am I, send me. And like Daniel, he was useful in the hands of the master. He was blessed because he made himself available. He separated himself. He did not defile himself, and gave his life totally to the Lord from a very young age, and served him to the very end. So we see the blessing of Daniel's life, one of my favorite of the prophets. And it's been a blessing to be looking and studying and learning more about him these last 4 weeks. And I hope that this has been a blessing for you as you've gone and walked through this key points in the Bible, and key passages in the Bible, and looking at Daniel, the prophet, Daniel, the young man, Daniel, the old man, Daniel, the man of integrity. So may the Lord bless you and keep you, and continue to seek the Lord like Daniel did. And may we follow in his steps. Amen. See you all next week.